I love trying out new art materials and experimenting with how those influence my art style or what they can teach me. But then there are those art supplies that are just always on my desk or always in my bag. The ones that might not be glamorous or exciting, but that I continue to reach for even after years. I'll be sketching a few portrait studies on this new yet old paper using some of my favorite pencils while introducing the rest of my favorite material. I'll be going over my most used art supplies for drawing and sketching in 2024. Both old favorites from the last years and new discoveries. If you plan to sketch more in the new year, or if you're excited to try more traditional drawing, or if you're just curious which specific pencils I can't stop rebuying, well, join me as I obsess over minutely different art materials. Grab a drink or snack and your own sketchbook and pencils, and let's chat art supplies. Let's start with the basics. Pencils. I started this sketch with a Blackwing matte, a 3B and a B pencil. Pencils might be boring at first glance, but really there's so much variety and personal choice to go with here. A pencil and paper is really all you need to start your art practice. I already mentioned the Blackwing matte. I'm on my third one of those and it's my fancy sketching time pencil. The matte surface really does look different compared to other graphite and reflects less light. So this one is perfect when creating deeper shadows. I never really use the eraser at the end though, so maybe that's a bit of a waste. They are roughly the equivalent of a 4B pencil, very soft and overall just great quality. I've never had any issues with splintering, breaking or uneven application. Despite being great for darkest shadows, they also create really lovely textures with a lighter touch or expressive line drawings. So this is a great all-rounder pencil if I only take one pencil with me. 4B in general is a great pencil grade to use because it forces me to strain less while drawing. I have to use less pressure, loosen my grip, and ever since I switched to generally softer pencils earlier this year, I haven't had wrist or finger pain after long drawing sessions. I have this Cretacolor Monolith graphite pencil, which is much more graphite to use up, so these last forever. While I love the Blackwing matte and Cretacolor graphite pencil, I'm way less picky when it comes to just, pencils. I use a variety of Korean local brands and recently also started buying these by Marco Renoir after liking their colored pencils, and I'm really impressed with their even application so far. I'm using them for this portrait sketch here, and the 3B especially feels wonderful. They are also incredibly light and thus not straining on my sometimes tired hand. On the other hand, no pun intended, I also have these mechanical pencils, one in 0.3 and one 0.5 millimeters. I use B or 2B pencil mines in these. Anything harder than that is a pain to work with, and I occasionally even switch to 3B or 4B mines as well. Perfect for tiny layout sketches, but also for detailed drawings that I'll later paint over in acrylics, for example, as these don't leave behind any graphite dust that could get caught up in my mediums or paints. Since they don't need to be sharpened, I also carry these with me to art markets and cafes. I also still use regular 2B pencils, though mostly for thumbnail sketches and quick line drawings, and I love using up pencils until they are tiny, like this. I have pencil extenders in different sizes, as different manufacturers create slightly varied pencil shapes, and like this I can make sure I don't grip them awkwardly. I'm emphasizing hand and wrist health a lot with all of this, be it the softer pencils, trying to go for lightweight options, using less force, and these extenders for a better grip. Wrist pain as an artist can be very scary, and if it turns chronic, devastating. While stretching and regular breaks help, I try to be preemptive and make sure my actual tools don't make anything worse. If you have pencils, you need sharpeners. Confession, I rarely sharpen with a cutter knife. I'm too lazy, and while I can draw details, my actual fine motor skills are terrible. I have a variety of sharpeners. I collect these like candy and also lose them just as easily. The Staedtler ones work great across many different brands, and these by Faber-Castell are great for on the go. Different sharpeners work for different pencil and colored pencil brands, and I always have a whole array scattered around. Kneaded erasers are my favorite. They don't completely erase a line or shaded area, but just reduce the intensity, so I can layer back over it instead of starting from scratch. They also don't damage the paper, which I appreciate if I draw in layers. If I have to use a proper eraser, it will be a mono Tombow one, as those are the best at removing graphite without smearing. What I do find myself reaching for is this small eraser pencil, also by Mono. While I have an even smaller round version of these, I like the rectangle as it's sturdier, and I can still use the corners for very precise erasing. I bought this Strathmore grey toned paper last month, because I was 99% sure I'd love it just as much as the Strathmore tan paper, which I've been using since last year. Both of these, while slightly different in thickness, have the same principle: a mid-tone hue to draw both shadows and highlights on. And I'd been looking for this grey version everywhere, as it's hard to find where I live. That tan paper has been amazing for me. Something about it made seeing light and shadow on portraits or figure drawings so much easier. When I spotted the grey paper at a slightly smaller size at the art shop in Seoul, I just had to grab it. Instead of a warm tone, which can shift all my graphite pencils to look quite brown, this is more neutral or even cool in comparison. The individual sheets are perforated, so this is that sweet spot between a sketchbook and separate paper sheets. I like to keep my sketches organized in their sketchbooks, but occasionally I want to use them for something else and have to cut them out, so this is a great compromise. Now, I have to be honest, it took me forever to notice that these papers aren't actually the same texture. The tan one is a vellum surface, while the grey toned paper I'm using here has a supposedly medium surface. I say supposedly because, well, it's a very smooth paper. Not quite a Bristol finish, which isn't ideal for sketching like this anyway, but I honestly can barely tell a difference now that I'm actively trying to find one. Paper texture preferences are very personal. I like smooth surfaces with just enough texture to let the graphite grip properly, but without a visible pattern. The grainier the paper, the harder pencils I use during the early stages, as the graphite really likes to cling to those texture indents. If you've seen my mid-year sketchbook tour, colored pencils are a whole thing this year. Some of my staples are the Marco Renoir grey tones. I grab a few whenever I am at the big art shop in Seoul. They are thinner than the Illuminance by Caran d'Ache and pack less of a punch pigmentation-wise. But they are very soft and a fraction of the price. The cool grey 94 is popping up in every other sketch of mine at this point. That's how much I love it. Their color indicators at the back of each pencil don't really match the actual shade well, though, so I have to remember the numbers I like or swatch them. Now, on the expensive side of things, Caran d'Ache Luminance. These are lightfast with very intense colors, incredibly soft, and produce beautiful textured marks that kind of remind me of chalk or Conte. There's just nothing quite like their black. But because of how soft they are, they get used up really quickly, and each repurchase hurts. The Payne's Grey is another favorite. You can see that I collect grey colors all across brands. Slightly less expensive, the Derwent Lightfast. These feel a bit drier and I can draw much more precisely with them. Derwent in general just seems to work for me and my drawing style, as I haven't really yet encountered a product of theirs that I dislike. I use their black, midnight black and raisin the most, as well as this beautiful mauve color here. That one combines amazingly with the 94 Cool Grey of Marco Renoir. Staying in the Derwent lane, Derwent drawing. For some reason, only 4 shades of these are sold as single colors at the art shops here in Korea. But luckily for me, my 2 favorites are among those. Terracotta has been with me for years and years now, and I think the one I just purchased is my 4th overall. I also love their Chinese white, which creates the most opaque white color I've yet found in a colored pencil. You'll see how I use that on my portrait sketch in just a bit. There are also a few Derwent Chroma Flow among my collection of favorites. These are so strange, because when I first tried them, I was like pretty meh on them. But somehow I kept reaching for them during the early stages of drawings. You can see that despite the swatch paper having quite heavy texture, these blend into a very even finish. Not always what I want, but it's really good to have. Red Storm here barely shows up on paper, so I draw portrait guidelines with it a lot. And I also love the slate blue. I often combine them with 2 particular Prismacolor shades, terracotta and indigo respectively. There's a reason I love and recommend colored pencils in sketchbooks. They do not smudge. I don't have to use fixative spray at all on the colored pencil sketches, and they hold up way better than anything with graphite. Thumbnail sketches with colored pencils also force me to think about warm and cold color contrasts early on in the concept stage. All these tools are usually in a small basket and scattered around my desk, but when I head out, I use this case here to protect them. This is originally a brush case for a set of synthetic brushes by Artify, but those have a permanent home on my desk now. All these individual textile pockets in different sizes for the brushes are perfect for my chaotic collection of pencils and colored pencils of different brands, and everything finds a matching spot in here. I went to the city to stock up on packaging material for my shop, and also get replacements for pencils I'd used up, like the Prismacolor Indigo. I had a few hours in between appointments, so I did a few sketches for a client on my tablet first, and then sketched a new illustration idea. Usually I'd only bring this small study sketchbook or similar sized options. But since I was carrying packaging supplies and my tablet around anyway, I also brought my large Hahnemühle sketchbook, in which I plan paintings, from early concepts, small doodles, and thumbnail sketches to written notes and lighting or post studies. This sketchbook that I started in March has been invaluable this year, as it's a place where all my ideas go to be developed and wait for their turn. At this point, I should probably mention my probably most used tool of the year. It's my tablet. While I use it for sketching with Clip Studio, especially when I create proper color thumbnails for client work, a lot of the time I use it for art references. A phone screen is kind of just too small and a laptop never fits on my desk, but my tablet is at a perfect size for detailed portrait references. I rarely just use a single image as reference, but compile different photos in PureRef, a program that's a great tool for throwing all my reference material onto a single large mood board to then export. These sketches here are for a Zodiac-inspired illustration that I'm ridiculously excited for, and you can see how I used my limited color pencil palette to explore possible warm, cool choices for the background and the figure, and the constellation itself. I've slowly built up layers here in pencil with that Blackwing matte and the 3B pencil. I was a bit worried that the grey toned paper would be too dark and that I'd need to use even softer or darker pencil shades to properly show up on, but I find that the 3B and Blackwing work perfectly on this. At this point I'm adding highlights to my portrait studies. This is best saved for the very end, as I tend to overdo it if I'm not careful in the early stages of the drawing. For very subtle light I use the Chroma Flow in white. This one is perfect for building up an area slowly, and on this grey paper creates a very neutral tone. At this stage of the portrait sketching here, I start to use a kneaded eraser to pick up stray or smeared graphite dust, kind of cleaning the paper. Then finally, at the very end, I use the Derwent Drawing Chinese White to push some of those specular highlights. You can see that in areas that are already covered in graphite, the Chroma Flow only smudges into that, while the Chinese White manages to properly layer on top. I hope this gave you an overview of my most basic art supplies. The ones I'd take with me to an abandoned island. The ones that I use on nearly every project, be it a simple sketch, a study, or preparation for a painting. As you can see, I don't love one single brand or one single type of pencil. You might have different color preferences or prefer different textures, but there are some universal recommendations, like the Intense Luminance Black, the Blackwing Matte and Cretacolor pencils, the Terracotta shade by Derwent, whatever cheap B to 4B pencils you can find, kneaded erasers, and combining different colored pencil brands but in similar shades to take advantage of their unique properties. Depending on where you live, there might be completely different brands available. I'd love to hear about your own personal favorites, no matter how obscure they might be. If you've listened to me talk about pencils and their friends for this whole video, thank you and welcome to the Obsessive Artist Club. I hope I'm not alone in my love for very specific colors and textures, and I hope that while I showed a variety of them here, the core of it also came across. Find a paper you like, a pencil you like, grab a kneaded eraser because they're fun, and just start drawing. Everything else is then a slow addition over months or years to see which tools fit your art style. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon in my next art video.